Ladies and gentlemen, Geri Petito.
I'm not an addict, I'm just an ass. And in time, this too shall pass. I'm not an addict, I'm just an ass. Geri Petito taught the class. I'm not an addict, I'm just an ass. Loves the answer, the greener grass. I'm not an addict, I'm just an ass. One day at a time, free at last.
When you don't know just what to do,
Just what to do, just what to do.
if what you're feeling is really true,
Is it really true? Is it really true?
just keep your ideas safe and sound.
Safe and sound, safe and sound.
That's exactly how change is found.
Change is found, change is found. I'm not an addict, I'm just an ass. And in time, this too shall pass. I'm not an addict, I'm just an ass. Geri Petito taught the class. I'm not an addict, I'm just an ass. Loves the answer, the greener grass. I'm not an addict, I'm just an ass. One day at a time, free at last.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Geri Petito Show. Everyone and anyone who knows me knows I am the author of I'm Not an Addict, I'm Just an Ass. I'd rather be a smartass than a dumbass. Because, guys, over 33 years ago, I was a dumbass. But today, 33 years later, through the grace of God, I can honestly say now I'm a smartass. And yes, the word ass is in the Bible at least 40 times, and it means donkey, and that's what I was. I'm saying all that to say this. You know, there's so many people out there struggling with addiction and with health. I'm a nutritional health coach and I'm a recovery coach. All my services to you are free. Please, please reach out. If you think my book can help someone, because I sure do, you could go right to Simon & Schuster's bookstore, Archway Publishing, BAM, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and you can go to my website, www.geripetito.com, and please subscribe to the Geri Petito Show YouTube channel. Before I introduce my incredible guest, I'd like to give a shout out to a few of my sponsors. Producer, I hear a little feedback on my mic. There's a little feedback on my mic. Okay, so I have Gene DiNapoli. Okay, he's an ETA, Elvis tribute artist. He's awesome, and he's putting on some shows. June 21st at 7:30 p.m. in New Brunswick Performing Arts Center, Summer Serenade with Chris Ruggiero, 732-745-8000. June 23rd at 3 p.m., the Egg Theater, Albany, New York, 518-475-1845, Summer Serenade, Chris Ruggiero. June 23rd, the Landmark Theater in Port Washington, New York, 917-567-5842, the Duprees, Twin Gold, and the Clusters. June 23rd at 7 p.m., the Landmark Theater, Port Washington, New York, 917-567-5842, Comedy Night, Fred Rubino and Friends, guys, Nick Petito, and Tugboat Nanny. Now, here's the thing, okay? I want to share something that's coming up June 14th at 7:30 p.m. The Sellersville Theater, Sal the Voice Valentinetti, America's Got Talent, 215-257-5808. Now, if you mention my name at the two Landmark Theater shows presented by Gene, use the code GERI, G-E-R-I, for discount tickets, guys, okay? Then we've got John Bishop, a.k.a. Johnny B., singer-songwriter, host of the Entertainment Luncheon South, a nonprofit network created for the creative. What he does is amazing, $20. You get dinner, lunch, I should say, and an incredible show. He's also the partner in the Joey D. and Johnny B. Rockin' Oldies band. And then we have Stormin' Norman Selden, 732-245-4777, www.stormandnormanselden.com, booking dozens of attractions for concerts and performances on venues of all sizes, from 5 to 12-piece band. He's an amazing keyboardist. He's awesome. He's a pianist. He's unbelievable. And guys, a lot of people didn't know this, but he helped get Larry Chance from the Earls started. Rest in peace, my friend Larry. We all miss and love you. Last, but certainly not least, Ken Ryan and Linda Garofalo, The Way It Used to Be. Singing songs from the 50s to the 80s, a tribute show to the greatest music and voices of all time. And guess what? He even sings Elvis for me, and they do a ton of fundraisers. Two beautiful people. So now I'm going to introduce my really cool guest, okay? My cowboy baby, my cowboy. Look at that cowboy hat. Rick Steber, say hello to everyone.
Howdy.
I love that. Howdy.
Nice to be here.
So, you're a really cool guy, all right? Let me tell you. So, tell everybody a little bit about you. We'll start there.
Well, I never started out to be a writer. I grew up in a rural Eastern Oregon, and nobody ever came to my school and said, you can be a writer, you can be an artist, you can be a sculptor. Um, and so, I had to take a lot of missteps before I finally took the step of what my real passion was.
Okay.
So I've been writing now for most of my life. At first, I thought I wanted to be in politics. I was a senior administrative assistant for the mayor of Portland after college, and politics just wasn't my bag. And the thing that I always enjoyed as a kid growing up was listening to the stories of the old timers, whether it was natives or homesteaders that had come in and broke the land out of sagebrush and juniper and planted the first crops. But, you know, I, after going to school and working in Portland, every time I'd come back over to the east side, I'd find out more and more of those old timers had died off. And I realized that at some point that if I had kids someday, they would never have that feel of roots that I did because they had never heard those stories. And then one day I ran across a quote. It was just a few words, but it changed the direction of my life. And those words were, every time an old person dies, it's like a library burning down. And you never get those stories back. So I decided at that point that I was going to dedicate my life to saving as many of those stories as I could. And over the years, 40 some years, I've interviewed 20,000 people. I have several million photographs. I've got a slice of Americana that nobody else does.
Okay, so, wow. That's amazing. You know, I agree with you. I mean, I remember my nonna, my dad's mother from Italy, but they, they all ended up in America, in New York. I remember when she died, she was 100 years old, and she was mentally fine except for the last couple of years. She was amazing. And I actually lived with my nonna in 79 while I went to art school in New York because I live in Jersey now. And I remember after she died, as I was getting older. You don't think about these things when you're younger. And
No,
I
you
said, I wish I would have sat down with my nonna and really had some amazing conversations. And I never got the opportunity to do that. So you brought tears to my eyes because when you said that, you are right. It's like a library burning down.
Well, and hopefully if somebody listening to this show will think, maybe I ought to talk to grandma or grandpa.
Yeah,
And find out some things, because once they're gone, you don't get it back.
that's right. Wow, amazing. So now, how many books have you written?
I've lost count, but it's somewhere over 50. And I've sold a couple million. I've had 5 of them optioned for movies, but and sometimes I've even got some of the Hollywood money. But along that trail, I've always end up coming to a sign that says "dead end sucker," and so I've never had a movie version of one of my books, but hopefully I will.
Let's give, before I forget, let's give Mike Mesner a shout out. He brought us together.
He did.
Yes.
Yeah, and he's a fabulous person. He's done well. A person could go to Shopify and go Writing the West. And Mike and some of his friends have taken my stories and made them dramatic stories and also some of my poems. I do a poem a day, and I have been for a dozen years.
So
Yeah.
what else has he done with you as far as working with you?
We've only met one time. He came up and we had a great time. But he takes those stories that I've done and narrates them along with some of his friends in a dramatic fashion.
That's cool.
Yeah, yeah, and it's great. I mean, he ran across my books and he just fell in love with them.
When he called me about you, man, he couldn't stop raving about you. Okay, so
Well, good.
I said, oh, he's a cowboy, honey. Yes, I love cowboys. So,
But there's nothing wrong with that.
so now, your two latest books. Let's talk about them. What are your two latest books?
Okay, the last one. Well, I've got one that's just going to be coming out called "A Cowboy Goes to War," and that's a story about a fellow back in World War II. He was 30 years old. He was a cowboy off the desert, joined up after Pearl Harbor, and ended up fighting. And I didn't know. I thought our first involvement in World War II in Europe was D-Day. Well, I didn't know that a year before that we had 1,000 ships, 165,000 men, and we invaded French Morocco, took Casablanca, drove across North Africa, went up into Sicily, jumped off on Salerno Beach, and drove straight up through Italy to Rome. And that softened things up for D-Day that happened a year later. So anyway, it's a story about this soldier, this cowboy, who ends up becoming one of the most decorated soldiers of World War II. And it's also the story about his son. You go from the greatest generation to the baby boomers and what his life was like. And, you know, he was in college during Vietnam, got a student deferment, and had an entirely different life than his father. So that's that story. Now, that one it'll probably be out next week. The one before that was called Man in the Mirror. And it's a story about a fellow that basically goes through life screwing up. And every time he finds somebody else to blame. And then one day, a fellow gives him a copy of the poem that was done in New Jersey called Man in the Mirror. It was also called Face in the Glass.
Wait, The Man in the Glass. I have it framed in my office. I sent, and there's no name on it. They don't even know who wrote it. Do you know?
Oh, no, they do. They do because years later, Dear Abby printed it and said it was from a drug addict. Well, it turned out it wasn't. It was, boy, and I can't remember
That's
the guy's
okay,
name.
because when you know who it is, just text me his name and I'll put it on the poem.
Yeah, it's right there in the book.
Okay,
I think you've got a copy of
okay.
it. But
That's the best poem, okay?
yeah, that is. And what happened on that poem was a young schoolgirl wrote into this magazine and said, "Why should I be a good person?" And so he ended up writing that poem for that. So anyway, in my story, this fellow ends up having somebody give him that poem, and it changes his entire life. Instead of blaming other people, he looks inside.
When the man in the glass looks back at you and says, baby.
Exactly.
I love it.
It ain't about your mother or father or husband or wife. It's that man looking back at you from the glass.
Ah, very cool. Very cool.
Okay, and then the other book is called Out Killing Indians, and that was the one we were talking about.
So say that title again. Producers, could he be a little louder on our end? A little louder, could he be on our end?
Oh, most people don't want me to be any louder than I am.
Okay, so say that title again.
Man in the Mirror and Out Killing Indians.
Out
And it's
killing.
Indians.
Got it.
It's absolutely politically incorrect in today's world, but that's exactly what went on. the federal government wanted to do away with every Indian that wasn't on a reservation. And the reason is because they called them renegade bands, because the renegade bands were a detriment to homestead.
It's amazing. I shared this with you earlier, but I'm going to share it with everyone listening. I had a woman that came here from the Dakotas, Ohitika, from her reservation to come live in studio years ago, and what I learned was unbelievable about what really went on and what we did to these poor people.
Yeah, I mean, it isn't like when the white man first arrived here that the land wasn't already occupied. You know, probably 25 years ago, I went back to St. Louis and was on they were setting the standards for history in the U.S. And they wanted to start it when the first slave ship arrived in North America. And I said, why would you turn your back on 40,000 years of history? It didn't start with the first slave coming to America. It started way before that with the native population.
Amazing. So tell us a little bit about a couple more of your books.
Oh boy. I did one called, well, to back up a little bit, I ran across this fellow who told me that he had come out west by covered wagon. And his name was George Craig, and he goes, I come out west in 1889, yeah, 1889. I rode a little Shetland pony all the way. His name was Pet. Dad had warned me, say, son, you go riding off like that in front of us, somebody's going to knock you in the head and steal your horse. But nothing ever happened, though, I suppose it could have. So having met George, I realized there were probably still people alive that had come out west in covered wagons. And so I went on a search and I ended up finding 40 people that as kids had come out over the Oregon Trail. Now, if you believe the historians, they say the Oregon Trail started in 1843 and it definitely ended when the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869. But in truth, people came out by covered wagon up until the automobile took over in the 1920s. And so all these people that I interviewed had perspective as children coming out over the trail. So I did a book called Oregon Trail Last of the Pioneers. And then we talked a little bit about By the Chief of Cadillac. And back in 1954, President Eisenhower wanted to get out of independent nations within the nation, reservations. And so he proposed that the different tribes self-terminate. One of the few that fell for that was the Klamath tribe of Oregon, Southern Oregon. And it was real iffy about the vote and everything else. But anyway, the vote was taken, the Indians took the money, and it was really about greed. It was greed by the federal government. It was greed by the Indians. It was greed by all the whites that stood in line to take the money. The government gave each Indian $43,000 in cash and told them they weren't Indians anymore. So it's that story. And that won the Western Writers of America Best Book of the Year, and which is to a writer is kind of like, you know, winning the Super Bowl and getting a Grammy all on the same day.
Right.
So that was a real good one. And I've never found anybody that has the balls to put that on the big screen, but it'd make a great movie.
Wow.
And then let's see, I got to look over at my books to tell you. I did one called 40 Candles on a Cowboy Cake.
Okay.
That's a story about this fellow, kind of a wild cowboy rounder that ends up getting abandoned on an island up in the Aleutian chain, and what happens to him. And then one called Secret of the Bull. I was out hunting down out in the middle of the Oregon desert, and it got along towards noon, and so I pulled up under a juniper tree to just stay, cool. And this cowboy came riding up and got off his horse. We ended up talking for quite a while, and he told me about this guy. He said, "There's a guy up the road here. He owns 64,000 acres. But rather than ever turn off the ranch over to his kids, like he had two boys, like he ought to, he drove them out and then put a stipulation in his will that if anything happened to him, the boys had to come back, run the ranch with their mother, and show a profit, or it all would be gifted to Oregon State University, and the family would get nothing."
Well, he wasn't a very nice man.
Yeah. So I took that, as a writer, it's kind of like being a miner. You've got to sift through a lot of worthless ore before you find that nugget. But to me, there was that nugget. So I built the story around that.
Okay. So is most of your writing fiction or nonfiction?
It's about even up. But even the fiction books are pretty heavy into nonfiction. I mean, they're real people, real stories in most instances. By the chief of Cadillac, if you know those people, the people down in Klamath County can identify them. But I put it as fiction because I didn't want to get sued.
Okay.
So, in this day and age, you got to be aware that anybody can sue you at any time for any reason.
So I want to throw something at you silly. All right.
Okay.
Things have to make sense to me, and the word fiction and nonfiction do not make sense to me. All right? Fiction means fake. Nonfiction means not fake. It should be the opposite. Fiction should be real. Nonfiction should be not real. Not fake. That's stupid.
Yeah, but fiction is not necessarily fake.
Okay.
Like I said, by the chief, it's basically a true story, but I didn't want the liability.
No, right. Not on your end. I mean, if you look up the word fiction, so it should be the opposite. Fiction should just be real. It shouldn't be not fake. That's stupid.
All right, let's get signs and go out and start walking up and down the road and get this thing changed.
Okay. I've protested, honey, with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. twice in Trenton, with my producer, actually, and my daughter, for our constitutional rights. I'm that person. So, honey, you know what, Ruben? We're going to go protest. Yes, that's what we're going to do. All right? So
Now, will this be a fictional protest or not?
I love it. So now, okay, talk about more of your books. Come on. This is so cool.
Okay. All right, so then I did one caught in the crosshairs, and it was interesting because the sheriff of the county where this murder happened was just here, and he just left, and I haven't seen him in 20 years.
Is this true?
It's a true story.
Okay, go ahead.
And I used names, and I figured I'd probably get sued. I ended up getting shot at over it, but it's a story about this cowboy that ended up getting shot because of elk. Somebody was elk hunting, didn't want him there, and ended up shooting him. Well, the local sheriff had MS, didn't feel capable of being able to do this investigation. It was the first murder in that county, Wheeler County, in I think it was 33 years. So he turned it over to the state police. Well, the state police had a detective heading this up, and he basically screwed up everything. And so I pointed out exactly what went on. And one night on the 20th anniversary of this, it happened in 1994, I got shot at. And I always told people, I said, if you're going to take a shot at me, make damn sure it's a good one because you won't get a second one. But when that shot went over the top of me, I was pretty darn close to the ground. And I crawled and got my gun, and they took off. But yeah, so, you never know. Sometimes you can hit pretty close, and not everybody is in favor of it. So,
Wow.
and that's another book that's been optioned by movies. Um, and then one called A Cowboy to Love, and it's a story about about a gal who meets a guy. Um, he they end up getting married. He moves her down to a ranch on the Snake River, this right in the heart of Hell's Canyon. Uh, it's a mile deep there. It's the border between Idaho and Oregon. And this was back in the late 40s, early 50s. The only people she ever saw was once a week the mailboat came up. So she ends up uh, not liking the solitude. And so she moves, divorces him, moves into town, ends up falling in love with a married rodeo cowboy. And, it didn't work out all that well. But like she said, it's better to find a few moments of something wonderful than a lifetime of nothing special.
Now, fiction or non?
What's that?
Is that fiction or nonfiction?
Well, it's
A mix?
fiction, but it's really not.
Okay.
90% of it isn't. Then I did one called Red, White, Black. And
Okay.
it's a story about in 1911, the Pendleton Roundup came down to a full-blooded Nez Perce Indian, a black man called George Fletcher, and a white man called John Spain. And at that time, Oregon was the only state admitted to the Union with an exclusion that blacks could not live within the boundaries of the state of Oregon. That was not repealed until 1924. So in the 1911 Roundup, the real question became, would the judges ever give the world championship to a man of color? So you had an Indian, you had a black man, and you had a white guy. So they ended up giving it to the white guy, and the crowd protested. And they went and they took George Fletcher, the black man's hat, cut it up into little pieces, gave everybody that took a piece of the hat, kicked $5 in, and he ended up with $700, which was about double what he would have got by winning it.
Oh.
So they called him the people's champion. And so I had been interviewing people over the years, and people would tell me, yeah, I saw George Fletcher ride, or, Jackson Sundown. He was a full-blooded Nez Perce, used to ride buffalo. They called him at one point Buffalo Jackson. But he ended up winning the Pendleton Roundup, being the first man of color to win a major rodeo in 1916, and he was 54 years old. Think about being 54 years old, crawling on a bronc like that, and actually winning it.
Wow.
Yeah, and so that's an important book in that it details the Jackson Sundown was on the retreat when the federal government, well, first they gave him the Wallowa Valley of Oregon, and then they took it away from him, even though it was by treaty. And then they were forced into trying to escape up into Canada. And so they took off, and Jackson Sundown was 14 years old at that point. And so he was with the retreat, and they ended up getting caught just before they crossed into Canada. Now, Sitting Bull, after Custer, had a camp up in Canada, and he had about 3,000 people there. That's where they were trying to get to. So it details that. It details the George Fletcher, and also the white man. And he had a very interesting story. He had roped, this was after 1911, he had roped a horse, and a dolly went around his wrist and popped his hand off. But he went on, even though he only had one hand, he still drove stagecoaches and races at the Pendleton Roundup. So that's an important book in that it details so much history. And then let's see, then I did one called All Around the 13th Juror. And that's a story about a guy named Mac Griffith. He was a hard drinking, hard fighting cowboy. And back in the late 50s, early 60s. And he came to Prineville in 1963 and ended up with a fist fight with an off-duty cop, state cop. Ended up, a local guy shot him, and the defense was, well, that son of a bitch had it coming.
Okay.
And in Prineville, my hometown here, that was a valid defense, and he got off. And so the shooter lived over in the Willamette Valley. I went over to meet him, and he goes, I don't want to talk about that. He said, I've been trying to forget that for 50 years. I said, he had his shirt open. I said, well, I said, you know, you're 80 years old. I can see by that scar running down your chest that you've had open heart surgery. You know, before you get upstairs and meet your maker, you might want to talk to me. And he said, sit down. And so he told me what happened that night, and that's all in the book. But he got off. It wasn't first degree, it wasn't second degree, it wasn't manslaughter. He got off. So that's that book. And then I did one called A Better Man.
Okay.
And it's a story about a fellow that went into Bend, Oregon, and Bend's kind of a progressive recreational town. And back in the late 70s, and started building houses. Well, he ended up with a payroll of $1 million a month. Then along came Jimmy Carter, 24% interest. He lost it all. He went home, sold everything he could at you know, a dime on the dollar, amassed $200,000, counted it out for his wife on the pool table. They had 4 daughters. He told her, he said, I've got $1 million life insurance policy in my desk. I'm going down to the Mojave Desert to drink myself to death. If I don't come back, cash that. And he went down to basically kill himself with alcohol. And I've had a lot of friends die from alcoholism, and it's a slow, sad way to go.
Wow.
But it finally came down to he was going to do himself in. He had checked to make sure that the shotgun that he could hit the trigger. But he had a building that he was building, and they were rolling out the trusses. He wanted to make sure it was being done right. And all of a sudden, he's down there. He plans on going back to his trailer, have one last drink, and shoot himself with a shotgun. But while they're rolling out these trusses, these 2 guys arrive. They're big, overweight guys. They're in painter's clothes with paint smeared all over them, ladders on their truck. And they come rolling in, and Dave sees them come in, and he goes, I don't want you bidding on the building. Just get out of here. And the heavyset guy says, you know, he said, we weren't even supposed to be here. We've been directed by God to come up all these different roads we've taken to arrive here because you need us, and we're going to pray for you. And so they started praying for him. He went back to his trailer after that, not knowing what was going on, poured himself that drink, and then he had this amazing vision of on the 101 flat. It's a place up here 30 miles out of town where he had a walk with Jesus. And I guarantee you, I've been in big auditoriums full of people, and I don't care how hard bitten you are, when Dave tells you this story about his walk with Jesus, there isn't a dry eye in the entire place. It is absolutely, totally convincing. He told me that story one time, and 30 years later, I called him up and I said, I got to hear that story again about your walk with Jesus. And I realized that I was going to tell his story was going to require two things: that he have faith in me and that I have faith in him. And as I'm interviewing him, I said one thing to him. I said, Dave, you're never going to get any better until you learn to forgive yourself. And he just started crying. I mean, he's a big man. He's 6'3". And he sobbed for probably 20 minutes. And then I said, you know, you have to have faith that I can tell your story in the right way. And that story required a lot of courage from him. And on the other hand, I have to have faith that you won't take another drink because you're going to ruin the story. And so he promised that he would never have another drink. So it's a story about alcoholism. It's a story about redemption. There isn't a week that goes by that somebody doesn't come in and go, that book changed my life.
Yep.
And it could be somebody that was married to an alcoholic that never could understand how could he love alcohol more than he loved me. He said, but I read your book and I understand it. One time I had a fellow come in and he walked in and he said, I want you to into my office. He said, I want you to see I've walked in. I said, yeah, I see that. I said, have a seat. So he sat down. He said, I've got a story to tell you. He said, something was bothering me. I didn't know what it was. I had no idea what it could be, but it was something. And it crushed me. It crushed me to the point I couldn't even stand anymore. I was in a wheelchair. I was in a wheelchair for years. And then I read your book and it all came back to me. I was 8 years old. I was in Cordova, Alaska. I was walking down the pier and a priest grabbed me and pulled me into a warehouse and raped me. And I let that crush me all these years. But when I read your book, it freed me and I stood up and I've been walking ever since. So you never know about the power of words, the power of story, and how it's going to affect somebody, how it's going to change somebody's life.
Rick, you just touched me. I normally read a poem midway through, but it's usually a different poem. I'm going to read right now this poem. Okay?
Okay?
Okay. So this one is called Christianity. I wrote this based on what you were just talking about. All right, you'll understand. So many religions have surfaced today. Most of us wonder which one's the right way. Being brought up Catholic, I wasn't a fan. I always struggled with listening to man. I just wasn't buying the crap that they said. My salvation's in Jesus through his blood he shed. Not sacraments and giving cash, confessional boots and Wednesday's ash. These rules they speak of are all man-made. If you open the Bible, man's words will fade. You won't find them in there because God said it clear. You won't work your way into heaven, my dear. Most big religions have put God away. They want your alliance and what you can pay. With Jesus nailed upon that cross before his last breath he took, his words were spoken for us to hear. It is finished, and left us his book. I tell you the truth, there's only one God. When you take your last breath, he'll greet you and nod. I hope you are ready to meet him that day. Want to hear him say, well done, instead of casting you away. My works are just worthless. I'd end up in hell. That's why he sent Jesus. Now in heaven I dwell. Now I want to read two parts of the next poem called Jesus. And this is
That's a good one.
about what you said about the priest hurting the boys. Okay. Religion is evil. It's caused lots of pain. God's full of love. In heaven you'll reign. Religion starts wars and splits up the home. The young people leave, now left to just roam. Religion is toxic. Take it from me. Almost cost me my life, but God set me free. Growing up Catholic made me hate church. Priests hurting boys made me now search. I couldn't believe God was in there. To me, church was evil and filled with despair. Then I found God, the real one I mean, not statues on crosses, but the God I have seen. I cried out one night, whoever's out there, please show me the truth. Does anyone care? It was then that I heard him as clear as can be. I'm here and I care. I made you for me. You are not alone. I will lead the way. I'll never leave you. Your price I did pay. I just had to share that with you.
Exactly. Yeah, you captured it.
Amazing what God can do, right?
Yep. If you give him a chance.
You have to go to him. He gave us free will, everybody. He will
Yep.
never impose on you. You have to say, Lord, I'm here. Take my hand. He will never leave you. Okay, continue, Rick. Thank you.
Okay, which one was I? Oh, yeah, and then I did one called Three Little Birds.
Three little birds?
Yep. And
Okay.
that's a story about a friend of mine. He had a heart disease. If he didn't get a new heart, he was going to die. And so he was in bed. He was afraid to live. He was afraid to die. He was afraid to move. His wife was coming home and saw a coyote chasing a goose
Okay.
and it ended up killing the goose. But she tried to intercede and she found one egg, a goose egg. And so she brought it home and her husband put it on his chest. Well, the next day that hatched, that goose hatched and it imprinted on George. And so everywhere George went, that goose would follow him around. So as he goes through this ordeal of getting a new heart, the thing that keeps bringing him back is the goose. And the goose would get up on he would get real tense. He ended up with lots of problems after the new heart. And the goose would jump up on the couch and put his head on George's chest, and he would immediately calm. So the three little geese is George, the goose, and the young boy that died that George got his heart. So now the goose is 25 years old. George is still alive, and his heart is strong. So that's a story about that one. And then one called Little White Man, and that's a nonfiction story. The Whitmans were early day missionaries to the far west, and they came out and they settled on the land of the Cayuse Indians. Everybody told them, don't settle on the Cayuse are a warlike tribe, but he went ahead and settled. Well, the Oregon Trail ran right through there, and so as this migration of people came through, they brought diseases with them, cholera, measles, smallpox, and the Indians started dying off. Well, the Indians blamed the Whitmans, and we call it the Whitman Massacre. The Indians call it the incident. 14 of the missionaries were killed. 50 years after that, the Cayuse asked for another white minister to come among them. And so this fellow named Jimmy Corneliuson, 21 years old, fresh out of seminary school, came up and he said, I won't preach until I learn a native language. So he learned to speak Nez Perce. And according to the treaty that was signed with the Umatilla, Walla Walla, Nez Perce, and Cayuse, they set aside 160 acres for the Catholics and 160 acres for the Presbyterian. And Jimmy was a Presbyterian. So he went to build a church. Well, the chief of the tribe, Chief Pale, had taken that land over and was renting it out to a white farmer. He didn't want to lose that income. So then you had these clash between Jimmy Cornelison and Chief Pale. Well, in 1904, the federal government opened an insane asylum in Canton, South Dakota, that was dedicated to one race, the natives. It was called Hiawatha Asylum for Insane Indians. And
Wow.
if you said anything, look it up. If you said anything negative about Indian agent, a sheriff, a minister, if you had alcoholism, TB, they sent you to Hiawatha Asylum for Insane Indians. And it was basically a death sentence. And Chief Pale got sent to Hiawatha Asylum for Insane Indians. So it's that story about religion, God, the natives, and what was done to them. And it's an important book to read.
Wow.
Then I did one called Fall Down Angel. And it's a story about, and I interviewed him over about a 10-year period. And that's a fiction because neither party wanted their name used.
Okay.
But it's what happened to them. They were both teenagers back in the 1920s. They hopped freights coming out west. The boy, they didn't meet each other on the train. The boy ended up becoming a petty criminal, holding up movie theaters, getting $2, $3, $4. He ends up being put in San Quentin for 10 years.
Whoa. For that?
The young gal ends up marrying a cop from San Francisco. That didn't work out, and then she ended up being the madam of a whorehouse in Nevada. And so when I was interviewing her, she was still the madam, which was pretty interesting. So, that it's a story about these two individuals whose lives end up coming together. So, and then I did one. Called The Last House.
Hold on, Rick. We're having some tech issues. Hold on, Rick. Hold on.
I can't help you with technical issues.
Rick, can you hear me?
I can.
I can hear you. Thank you, guys. Okay, so last I heard you say was the two lives were coming together.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, I suppose we ought to at least touch on how I got started and stuff.
Yeah.
After I quit the city of Portland, I realized that to be a writer, it's not like being an attorney and being able to hang out a shingle and business will come to you. So I knew I had to have a base income. So I took a look, and at that time there were 104 weekly newspapers in Oregon. Nice thing about weeklies is they don't overlap. Each community has a local newspaper. So I started a column called Oregon Country. And I to publicize that, I rode to horseback to every newspaper in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. And I ended up getting about half the newspapers in Oregon that carried that column. There were 54, I think it was 54 newspapers that carried it. So that kind of gave me a base income. And I knew that as a freelance writer, you can't find one good story, sell it one time, and ever hope to make it. And so by syndicating it, I was able to have kind of a base income that allowed me to start writing books. So, and I had an agent that in New York, but he died. And so now I don't even have an agent anymore. So hopefully I can, find somebody, but so far it's kind of been a dead end. One gal that's an agent said, "Oh, I love all your stuff. Your writing is fantastic. If you were a woman of color, there'd be no problem placing you."
Wow.
I said, that's not only racist. I said, so anyway, that's.
Well, wait, how can they get your books? Let's tell everybody that and how they could reach out to you and all that info.
Okay. I've got a website. It's Rick Steber Author, and Steber is Steber, author.com. I had somebody in China steal the name Rick Steber and turn it into a dog site or something. So it's got to be ricksteberauthor.com. And we can ship books all over. Like I said, I've sold over 2 million copies sitting in Prineville, Oregon. So.
Very cool. That's very cool. All right, so you've got a few more minutes left. So what else would you like to tell everybody? The mic is yours.
I also do poems. And I do one a day on Facebook. Have for 12 years. One time I got a call from a guy, and it turned out that this fellow, I do a radio program, a syndicated radio program on my poems, and they play early in the morning locally here. Anyway, this guy had lost his job. His wife had left him and took the kids, and he was down. It was early in the morning. He had a cup of coffee. He had a pistol sitting on the table, and he was going to end it. Well, the poem that morning was, "You never know what good's going to be coming around the bend. So tell me, why don't you try to hang on till the end?" And he heard that poem, and he called up a friend, and he said, "Man, I need some help." And so they went ahead and called a preacher in, and the man's still alive. So you never know how it's going to, just a few words of encouragement to somebody, how it's going to play out. So, and I tell people, it's important that we don't turn our back on the elderly.
That's right.
If you have a few extra minutes, stop. There's somebody on your street that needs the snow shoveled, or they need the garden watered, or whatever. Find out about those people. Visit with them. We've kind of become detached in the society, and we need to become attached to family, to the elderly, and show our respects to those people.
Amazing. So, Rick, you inspired me to read another small poem.
All right.
And this is called Put Down the Gun, what you were just talking about. And I wrote this because a lot of people are struggling with suicidal thoughts. Thoughts. And guys, if you're out there struggling, I hope you heard what Rick said. I hope you're listening and you could just take this all in, okay, and know someone is listening, okay? This poem's called Put Down the Gun. Please listen very carefully if you are struggling. I had to have this purple gun, just in case my life was done. I kept it safe locked in my room 'cause I was filled with gloom and doom. Yes, there were times that I just knew if I loaded it up what I could do. But I kept on hearing that gentle voice, put down that gun, you have that choice. Life may seem hard at the end of the day, but that's when you need to really pray. Dear Father, I beg you to show me the truth. How can life be so bad when I'm only a youth? Get rid of that gun and go take a shower. Ask someone for help. You do have that power. I hope that touched someone out there who might be struggling today.
Touch me.
You touched me, Rick.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much for having me on and allowing me to share, some of my stories, some of my friends with you and with people up and down the coast.
I'm going to ask you to share one more thing before we close. People out there that are struggling, people out there that really need to hear something encouraging. How old were you when you wrote your first book?
Oh, let's see. I was about 30.
Okay. And you're still writing today, correct?
Yeah, and I'm halfway to 154.
Okay. So now, guys, age is just a number. Look what this gentleman has accomplished. Okay, and he's still doing it. And he's still doing it.
What you have to do is you have to find, so many people just go through the motions of living without ever finding the passion. What we're really here for is to find that passion that drives us. And once you find that passion, you start living. Until then, you're just treading water. You're getting nowhere.
So this is what we're going to do, guys. We're not going to play the theme song at the end. I'm going to read the poem that I was originally going to read, and that's how we're going to close. So first of all, Rick, I want to say thank you to you for honoring me here today. Again, thank you to Mike Mesner for the introduction. And guys, please, please, please check out his books, okay? Go to his website, okay? This guy's amazing. And, I hate saying age, I do. But I didn't write my book till I was in my 50s. I didn't start doing radio till I was in my 50s, okay? So guys, listen, age is just a number. Don't make it hold you down, please, all right? You are amazing. Rick, you are an angel. I am so honored that you honored me here today on this radio show. My producers are listening, and they're giving you the thumbs up, and they just think you're great. So we really honestly here on the Geri Petito Show in Hamilton Radio want to thank you. I want to close out with this poem because this poem is called Utilizing Gifts and Talents. And I want everybody out there who's struggling with feeling like you're worthless, like you have nothing to offer, you have no talents. Yes, you do. We are all born with a gift. You just have to figure out what that gift is, okay? Right? There you go. He's shaking his head. So here's the poem, guys, and then we're going to close. Oh, this show will also be on iHeartRadio next week, probably Wednesday night. I'll let you know the time and all that. But this will also air on iHeartRadio next week. Please share this show, guys. Okay, here we go, producers. Utilizing gifts and talents. We are born with talents. We are born with drive, with different gifts to help us thrive. I knew early on I was born to draw and paint, to also write poetry, and to talk without restraint. Our gifts and talents should all be used, God's gift to us not be abused. We can go far in life for sure, using our gifts to go on tour. All our talents should be used to create ourselves and more, but then our job's to share them to even up the score. You see, in life what's needed is not just for ourselves. Once our gifts are mastered, take them off the shelves. A living we can make by spreading them around, not just for the money, but to spread a peaceful sound. Don't take for granted the gifts you're given. Go out and spread the joy. Our gifts are not to be held back for us to self-destroy. Put your efforts forth. Do not hesitate. All your talents, my friend, are never second rate. Never hold them back or you will surely die. Maybe not in body, but your soul will cry. Our gifts were made to share, our talents made to soar. Go through life enlightened and then you can roar. Be proud of who you are. Be happy you're alive. Once again, my friend, your gifts will help you thrive. By putting efforts forth, not keeping them at bay, your name, Rick Steber, baby, will live forever, forever and a day. So go through life excited for what you sure can give. To yourself and others is our reason to live. Our grave will be quite lonely, but our legacy lives on. So make sure people smile with the breaking dawn. And that's what you are doing, Rick. You are making people smile. Never stop doing what you're doing. And I am so grateful we got to meet. Thank you, honey.
Well, thank you.
So great. Bye, everybody. Thank you for listening.